Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all fandoms, welcome to the Ferret Raccoon podcast episode 113. I am the Younger Raccoon, once again your only host, which seems to be a recurring theme, I guess, for 2019. Things have been a bit crazy at the moment because Ace was kind of originally going to be on this podcast, but literally last minute things changed, and once again I am recording very early on in the morning because I'm going to have construction in my house for, I honestly don't know, for the next few hours, and I don't know how noisy it's going to be, and I don't want to risk recording and you just constantly hearing banging, drilling, whatever's going to happen. But hopefully the only noise you will hear coming from this podcast other than my voice will be the birds, which hopefully you can't hear that. But yes, we're back for the last podcast of April, and things have been pretty damn eventful. I think, funny enough, this podcast pretty much, well, everything I did pretty much was during the Easter holiday, so most people were off, so most people had a pretty relaxed time. I'm sure most people got a lot of things done. I kind of did for the most part. Not too much stuff in terms of like what I actually watched or, did. I was mainly organizing stuff, kind of spring cleaning, I guess you could say, as it is the best time to do it, I guess. But the main two things I watched were, I actually went and watched Fleabag Season 2, which was the BBC One comedy series I talked about last podcast. I watched Season 2. I pretty much watched it all in one day, literally a few days after the series actually ended, which was a massive surprise to the fans and me, because one of the cast members basically on, I guess, BBC News was like, yeah, no, it's ending, this is the last episode. So people were kind of shocked, and obviously given how new of a series it is, only ending literally 2 to 3 weeks ago, I'm not really going to talk about what exactly happens in this series, but I guess what it kind of does, which was very interesting in that it kind of really explained and focused in exactly on the character of Fleabag a lot. It kind of, given that season 1 ended the way it did, it definitely kind of references that and kind of goes on that, and everything that did impact that ending definitely plays a massive part in season 2, especially a certain new character that kind of changes and flips the whole situation of what's going on its side. We actually see the character of Fleabag trying to slightly be different and trying to better themselves for someone else, which I thought was very interesting, and kind of having a very bold and very different theme that's kind of plaguing her was very interesting. The ending as well, without saying anything, was very interesting. It kind of completes everything for the audience. But yeah, really loved the series. Definitely one of the strongest series I've watched this year. And going back old school and kind of staying with BBC One, I went and watched all of the cult classic and quite old series now, The Mighty Boosh, which I think if you speak to any English person, I'm pretty sure they are aware of The Mighty Boosh for the most part. But The Mighty Boosh is essentially a surrealist, somewhat frightening, to some extent maybe dark, musical-based comedy about, well, the premise of the show sounds like a joke. So basically the main characters are a fashionista, a jazz fan, a shaman, and a gorilla that can talk, that plays the drums. And essentially this series follows the weird adventures these 4 characters have for the most part. Mainly the 2, well, let's just say human characters played by Julian Barrett and Noel Fielding, who I think most people know of recently from the Great British Bake Off. Yeah, it's him. And this series is very weird and very interesting in that, in my opinion, it kind of has that, it kind of reminds me or kind of feels like a love letter / parody to 60s and 70s Doctor Who episodes, where the costumes, weren't that great, but the threat was kind of still there, and you can tell the love and the craft was still there, because most episodes do kind of have a very weird kind of antagonist, a character that is, very obviously played by a human, but a lot of the time you can see that the makeup isn't quite well done, and it kind of has a bit of a budget to it. A lot of time when the characters travel, it's very clearly a set, but what they do with the set design and how they're really able to do a lot with so little is fantastic. I mean, there are points where I can tell where it's been made, but the only reason that is because I'm watching it on a much more modern TV and they were formatting it on a different TV, so that completely makes sense. But the series, I thought, was it took me a while to get into. The first season, some episodes were quite slow, and I guess for anyone who is going into the series and is kind of going, oh, this is, not that great, I would say stick with it, because there's a lot of great things to come in season 1. Season 2 and 3 is where it really kind of gets its stride, and it's really where a lot of the ideas and characters, more memorable characters, appear. One character in particular being a character, of course, known as the Evil Cockney, who's just this green guy who has a Cockney accent. There's lots of really weird and crazy stuff, like the Moon talks in this, and the Moon talks complete gibberish. Another character that I find very disturbing is the Crack Fox, which I still think is one of the creepiest things I've ever seen on TV. Just look up the Crack Fox and you'll understand what I mean. But really, really interesting series. Really loved it. I'm a big fan, and I'm definitely going to kind of track down some of the other media related to it. And actually, speaking of the media related to it, I'll quickly talk about Record Store Day, which did happen on the 13th of April, which I was there. I was lining up at my record shop. I'm not going to tell you what record shop because I don't want people taking my place next year. I was somewhere in London, that's all I'll say. And I basically was lining up from about 6:20 till about 9 o'clock when the shop opened. And it was pretty damn cold. I lost a bit of skin on my hands, basically, because it was that cold. But I basically got the main things I wanted for the most part. And I'm not really going to bore you with the exact list, but just to throw a few highlights, I managed to get the Mighty Boosh Complete Radio Series on vinyl. I got Pink Floyd, A Scarful of Secrets. I got the Emerson, If You Need Me, Call Me record. And I got the Gorillaz The Fall album as well. So basically everything I wanted minus the Crow soundtrack, which was a bit pricey, and it was at another shop which I was not prepared to line up for, and I was happy with everything I got. Literally, it was a case of I got 6 out of 7, so I'm happy with that. But let's actually move on to some pretty interesting news that happened over the last 2 weeks, happened over the last fortnight. Something I was pretty excited about. It may not be as big of a deal for some people if they're not as interested in science as I am. But of course, we're talking about the first ever image of a black hole basically being taken, which is a pretty damn big deal in my opinion because especially for the world of science, because originally a black hole was just a theory that was conceived by Albert Einstein, and we kind of found out that they kind of exist in 1971, but now we finally have like a visual to one of the most powerful forces in existence, to our understanding, which is kind of crazy and pretty interesting because, for the most part, it's I'm losing my train of thought, and I'm losing my train of thought. Excuse me. I'm just so excited. I can't think. No. It was interesting though that the black hole itself, although it is a very blurred image, but keep in mind how it was taken, which I'll explain in a minute. It's interesting that nobody really got the look of the black hole correct. I guess everyone just kind of depicted it as literally darkness, a black hole, but it actually has color to it, a yellowy orangey red, which is basically gas around it because its mass and energy is so big. And funny enough, it basically resembles an eclipse, which is interesting. We don't get eclipses very often, and I'd imagine we obviously don't get black holes very often. So sorry, excuse me, I had to make a quick cut. Sorry for my rambling and stuttering. If you look at the details, the size and the look of this thing is truly crazy and amazing for the most part. And how we even got this one singular image was literally, roughly about 30 years in the making for the most part, if you look at all the details and how they essentially, went about trying to see this thing or, kind of get an understanding. We used the most powerful telescope in history, or as far as I'm aware, the Event Horizon telescope, which I'm really surprised they would name a telescope after a terrible film. That's a joke. I know what an Event Horizon is, but yeah, it was crazy. It was a network of 8 telescopes around the world in order to see that far into space to get this one photo. It's truly incredible stuff. Even if you don't care about science, even if you don't believe in science, you got to be impressed by that at least. That's a lot of work and that's a lot of effort. And also, speaking of a lot of work and effort, it is worth mentioning Kate Burman, I believe that's how you say her name, who developed the algorithm for the Event Horizon telescope. And there is this great photo which will be within the link that I provide in the download link and a description. There's a great photo of her with all the data and code that got us this photo kind of in the form of external hard drives, just in this mass pile. I don't know how big the external hard drives are. I don't know if they're in terabytes or, each external hard drive is 100 or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, there's that great photo of her just kind of like, yeah, look, here's all the external hard drives. And then, which I find is very interesting, it's historically very similar to the photo of Margaret Hamilton, who has this massive tower of books that is literally the height of the woman, almost towering over her, that essentially contains all the data and all the code that got us to the moon in 1969. So it's kind of crazy how, once again, it's another lady, working within such a high scientific field, with this massive information kind of just collected that helped us really achieve something historical and great. Once again, in a very similar kind of pose. I don't know if that's intentional or not, whether they were like, yeah, take this picture like this. And also the contrast from books to digital is, quite funny as well and worth mentioning. But yeah, interesting stuff. Really happy that we have, I guess, this confirmation, or an idea of what's out there. Kind of going on a bit of a sadder note, we have to talk about the fact that the Notre Dame in France, Paris, unfortunately burned down, almost completely burnt down a few days ago. 850 years, I believe, of history completely gone just like that. And it's incredibly sad, for any country to lose an icon or a part of themselves that important. And I really did feel for people who were quite upset, and you can kind of see the sadness and the upset in the video I've decided to link. Because given it's something that visually happened, I thought I would link a BBC video actually showing and kind of reporting, kind of getting some interviews, so you kind of get a little bit more of a scale instead of just pictures, just in case you hadn't seen it, or just in case anyone from the future is watching this or listening to this, excuse me. But it's crazy. I mean, I kind of believe that construction or restoration was taking place on the building before the fire. So whether, unfortunately, someone who was working on it caused this fire or not, someone's going to lose their job. Whether it's just like scapegoating or finger pointing, this is a big deal, and it's going to be talked about for the next few months, obviously. So yeah, I just kind of think someone's going to lose their job. But to kind of be a bit more positive about the situation, I'm very thankful that no one was hurt, nor the building was completely burnt down. The fast action that prevented, an even bigger, disaster, was pretty, that was good. At least it was a very calm handled situation. Nothing else bad happened. I mean, everyone who helped put the fire out, everyone who kind of like kept people at distance, kept people safe, kept people calm, and even some people who managed to, I guess, save parts of the building and kind of, go through the rubble. Like, there was this one worker who essentially found the rooster that is on the top of the spire that fell down during the fire. He managed to essentially find it through the rubble, so that got saved, which is pretty good. So hopefully that's a part of history that, got preserved. So I'm pretty happy about that. I'm sure most people are happy about that. Just want to give a massive, just want to say a massive well done to everyone who, I guess, handled this situation as best as possible. And they have my respect, much to, I'm sure, the people of France and the people who look after the building are in debt to. So, there is a bit of a positive there. Like I said, no one got hurt, no one died. Most of the building is still there. I think the base ground level is there, and I think you can rebuild it, but it is a bit of a shame that, such an iconic piece is unfortunately gone. But nothing else I can say other than let's, I guess, learn from history, I guess. And we have another bit of sad news before we actually get into some of our media-based topic, and that is Monkey Punch, aka Kazuhiko Katō, I believe that's how you say his name, or his real name anyway. Monkey Punch is the name he was known as, because I believe his producer at the time randomly just said, if you change your name to Monkey Punch, you'll be successful. Yeah, it's I guess to some extent he was right, but I don't know how he managed that. But but Kazuhiko Katō, who is essentially the legendary illustrator, artist, and writer of the Lupin III series, which is a Japanese manga and anime series that's been going on for a good few decades and has tons of incarnations. He unfortunately passed away on the 11th of April due to pneumonia. Pneumonia, I believe that's how you say it. Spelled Pneumonia. I'll be honest, I knew of the disease itself. I'd never heard of the name, so it's kind of a new, I guess, word to me, unfortunately. But pneumonia? Am I saying that right? Let me know if I'm saying that right, because I really don't want to be making mistakes, especially Monkey Punch's full name. I don't want to be giving any disrespect to anyone, and I apologize if I have mispronounced anything. I'm not trying to take the mick. But yeah, I was not ready for this news, to be honest. I'm a massive fan of the Lupin the Third series, as I'm sure lots of people are. I'm sure most people know of the series for the most part. And, and I don't claim to be an expert, just in case anyone's wondering. I haven't seen everything. But in my opinion, Lupin the Third is one of the best and most accessible mangas and animes ever made. That's in my opinion, and I strongly will, defend that opinion, because it just works. I mean, everything about Lupin the Third is cool. It is probably one of the coolest things ever made. I would take Lupin the Third over James Bond any day, especially new James Bond. It's interesting because, I'm losing my thought again. Excuse me. But with its accessibility, you can essentially start anywhere, any decade, any adaptation, whether that's film, manga, or anime, and you will just get it. You'll immediately understand the characters. You will love the characters. You'll get what's going on. Although these characters are, international thieves, criminals, whatever you want to call it, they are probably the most lovable you'll ever know. And it's a very small cast, and these characters have been around for decades, but yet we still love them and we still understand them. And I would honestly recommend, even if you've never seen anything to do with Lupin the Third, even if you hate Japanese animation to some degree, I would honestly recommend giving Lupin the Third a shot, because I think everyone can enjoy Lupin the Third. I think it has that mass appeal, If I were to recommend one thing for you to watch, it's definitely The Castle of Cagliostro, the 1979 film, which is also technically a Studio Ghibli film, as Hayao Miyazaki essentially animated it just before founding the studio. So that's another little fact right there. If you want another little fact about Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third is, well, how do I phrase this exactly? Inspector Gadget is technically a Lupin the Third show. Originally, they were going to do a spin-off. I think it was Lupin the 8th or 7th. But given the fact that Lupin the Third is based off the he's essentially a kind of copyright-ish, not. It's a bit of a tricky situation where Lupin the Third is actually based on the I think thief/detective of the Lupin stories, which actually wrote, but they never really got the copyright, so they had to immediately change it last minute to Inspector Gadget. So yeah, Inspector Gadget is technically Lupin's great grandson. So that's another little fact for you right there. But please watch something to do with Lupin the Third, even if you listen to the amazing soundtracks, which I own a lot of on vinyl, because like I said, I think Lupin the Third is one of the coolest and best things ever made. Boy. But yeah, really sad to see Monkey Punch pass away. And especially given that the most recent Lupin the Third film that came out was titled Goodbye Partner. So yeah, it's very sad to kind of hear that. But slightly moving on, we'll get into the news and topics. And the first story I'm going to talk about is something that could potentially become a big deal later down the road, although I don't really think it's as big a deal as I think the people behind it want it to be, and that is Disney Plus, Disney's streaming service, which was unveiled quite a few days ago. And I feel that, for the most part, all the talk about this for the last 2 years, and that there are now tons of like broad and specific streaming services out there, and kind of like the brand name of just Plus, like Disney Plus, really isn't as interesting or as exciting as I think they thought it would be, because it kind of feels like everyone's already forgotten about this or doesn't care, or I guess never cared from the beginning. Yeah, it's interesting because although we have the information, and I provided a link that kind of gives us as much information as I could, find, in order for, people to kind of understand a bit more, because I'm not going to go through every detail and go, that's good, that's great, because that would be boring. But, yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to talk about the name, Disney Plus. Like, you couldn't have come up with a better name? Like, that's really lame. Like, that's what you call your secondary channel that runs an hour late from your scheduled broadcast. Almost every major British channel has a 1+ or a plus channel. It kind of sounds like you don't care about this service. If I was kind of coming up with a name for, my hopefully multi-billion-dollar selling streaming service, a lot should be riding on this, I would have gone for Disney Magic or Disney Enchanted. Is that not better? Tell me, is that not better than Plus? Although I think anything would be better than Plus. But yeah, the things Disney Plus does get right to some extent is, I guess, launching it pretty soon. I think America is getting it in a few months, and I believe England will most likely get it kind of between December and January, which is good. You want to get this rolling. You're already playing catch up for Netflix. They've been on a bit of a roll for the last 5 years or so. Yeah, so launching it pretty fast will be good. It's slightly, I'm not sure if I worked out the maths here, but I think it might be slightly cheaper, or at least the same price as Netflix in this country. I'm not sure about in other countries, but doing the money equation, because I believe it's maybe going to cost about $8 in America. If you kind of do the conversion, I think that's maybe going to be about the same price as Netflix, maybe £1 cheaper, which already they kind of have a slight advantage over Netflix. And I think the best thing about the service is you can essentially, basically watch everything by mass downloading a whole library, which I think is fantastic, because basically you can download a whole library, kind of store it on like your phone or I guess your computer, and basically take that with you to watch wherever. So for example, if you wanted to watch a whole of a series, download that on your phone and basically watch it wherever. That is great. Netflix desperately needs something like that, but I know why they don't have it, because they're paranoid that people aren't going to watch their platform. That's why they have like no real distributing rights. That's why it's a fight to get anything from them on DVD, because they're too paranoid that, if we distribute it and only get a small profit, only get a small percentage of the profit, we're not going to make our money back. You will. You guys are just being stupid. That's why you're losing out. But yeah, that's something everyone needs to roll out. BBC iPlayer kind of does that, but it's more of a timed thing. If Disney does that, that could be a real game changer, and that's honestly really exciting, because more people need to be doing this. Obviously, internet connection and how exactly that would work would come into play. I mean, once you have it downloaded, you have it downloaded. But if you want to be downloading the highest quality, whether that's 1080p or 440, I don't know. But it's something that I guess will happen. Whether this is going to be a piracy issue, how they're going to get around that, I don't know. My guess is coding the actual downloads with something. So if it obviously does find its way onto YouTube or something like that, trace it back, they know where it's come from. But that's the stuff I like. In terms of what could happen and the situation is whether people care and whether it's going to be a successful thing, let's say putting them up against Netflix. If Disney removes everyone's licensing and broadcasting streams of Fox Media, and essentially they make Disney Plus the only place that you can watch, Fox shows like Simpsons, for example, they would be a real threat to Netflix if they do that. Yes, it's a bit of a scummy move, and Disney have already done a few scummy moves by cancelling a lot of their shows, but at the same time, competition is good, and it would be nice to see Netflix kind of step up their game, because let's be honest, Netflix is really slacking. Netflix has too much on there, and most of it is not good. In my opinion, there is 80% garbage on Netflix. If I'm talking, not including the films that have already existed, I'm talking everything that Netflix claims to own, because they don't actually own a lot. It's just licensing. So whenever you see Netflix original, it's not a Netflix original. It never is a Netflix original. They have the cheek to say the Ultraman reboot is a Netflix original. Ultraman has been around for almost 40 years. It's not a Netflix original. It's just fluff when they're saying that. Netflix, to be honest, I'll tell you what, actually look up what Netflix owns. You'll be surprised how little they actually own. Just for example, they actually own BoJack Horseman. They do not own Black Mirror. So yeah, just to put that in perspective, because I'm very sick of people always referring to Japanese animated series as going, this is the Netflix show. It's like, no, it's really not. Yeah, Netflix needs to step up their game, and Disney could be a threat, especially the whole downloading thing. And obviously, if they essentially take, Fox is a big kind of network, and they probably own. Let's see. If we go in films, let's say if we regard every single film that's ever been made and put it into a percentage, and kind of take a percentage of how many films of that Fox owns, I would say, maybe about 30% of all films ever made. If Disney has 30% of all films ever made, that's a big deal, because they are taking 30% away from everyone, which is a big deal. And I'm not just talking about streaming service, I'm talking if Disney goes, no Channel 4, no BBC, no Sky, to some extent, you can't have the Aliens franchise on your platform. That could be a big deal, and that could be the one real kicker and the one real thing they kind of gets the ball rolling for them, despite the fact having Disney exclusive, Star Wars exclusive, Marvel exclusive, everything else I don't care about. But yeah, that could be the real thing that really gets people gets them an audience, despite the fact it being a pretty scummy move. But then again, just look at Disney's history. I think Disney Plus honestly will make a profit. I don't think it's going to essentially be that much of a threat to things like Netflix, not unless they do what I suggested. But I honestly think that a good majority of their target audiences are parents with children. And those parents just want to hand their children an iPad and let them be amused for a few hours. Parents want a break from their children that isn't the children hogging the TV watching Frozen again. Yes, you can kind of chop that up to lazy parenting to some extent, but at the same time, children can be pretty stressful, and sometimes you need literally an hour away from children. This is going to be a lifesaver for a lot of people, where they can just, like I said, give the child the computer, the Nintendo Switch, the iPad, and just say, watch Frozen. Especially during the holidays, because although I do not have kids, I know what it is like to deal with children, especially bored children during the holidays. So they could really make a profit from that fact, because it's not expensive. It's literally, £6-7 out of a parent's paycheck to shut your child up. Damn right people are going to sign up for that. You could just call it Children Shut Up and it would sell pretty well. But at the same time, if you ask me, this doesn't appeal to me. Nor does Netflix, to be honest, because like I've already mentioned, there isn't really a lot of things on the platform that I really care about. If you really wanted to get me, on board with Disney Plus, I would say add all the historical, the dark, and kind of race-related, media content that they just won't talk about. I'm talking about things like Song of the South and some of the more interesting history-based Disney animations, like the one where Donald Duck is inducted into the German war during the Nazi takeover. People label that as Donald Duck is a Nazi, but it was essentially Walt Disney at the time kind of explaining and showing how Hitler is rising to power and what exactly he is doing to kind of build this army. Especially animations like Pluto's Judgment, I believe it's called, where essentially Pluto the dog goes to hell. And once again, Song of the South. If Song of the South and things like that aren't on the platform, I'm not interested. Simply put, I don't care. It's not worth my time. And I think if they don't do it, they're just cowards once again. But yeah, let's move on to our last two things. Let's actually move on to trailers. And the first trailer I have is a trailer I'm pretty interested in, and that's the trailer for Beats. Now, not to be confused with the garbage-made headphones, Beats is going to be a British, a BFI, a British Film Institute and lottery-funded British film, kind of essentially dealing with, I guess, tensions and kind of like, adulthood during the 90s in Scotland. The trailer didn't exactly give away what exactly it may be referencing in terms of Scotland's actual history. I don't know if it's just the Troubles or terrorism or just, the old saying of we don't know what to do with these teenagers, but it was kind of funny because whenever I see the BFI logo and the lottery funded logo, I always think of two things, and those two things are that this is going to be a good film, because they usually are, and that this is going to be one of 3 films that England produces. Yeah, we really don't have a film industry anymore, and there's a lot of people you can blame for that. But thank goodness, like I've already said, when we do make a film, it tends to be pretty damn good. But yeah, I'm getting a lot of Train Spotting and This Is England and kind of Billy Elliot, the film, vibes from this film, which is, I think, a good sign, because all 3 of those films are pretty damn good and kind of, definitely are a period decade piece and kind of follow interesting matters within British, and Scottish and Irish to some extent, matters at the time. The 90s and the 80s in England were very interesting times, and they are a very good source for subject matter. Do some research, guys. If you're a struggling independent filmmaker, look back to the history of those decades. There is a lot of material. I mean, just look at the current TV show Dairy Girls. They're basing their series within a very interesting time in dairy. But yeah, although this was a digitally shot film that has been edited in post-production, although actually watching the trailer again this morning, it might actually be shot on film because I didn't notice film grain. It was kind of put in black and white, because it takes place in Scotland during the 90s. And although you might be able to chalk that up to, I don't know, being lazy or, we just want to like lazily get the aesthetic of it's the olden days, to use a very childish expression. I think it's actually a little bit more technical and smart than I think most people are going to give it credit for. And, for example, if you actually really look at the film, it's lit perfectly for the kind of black and white saturation conversion, which is pretty interesting. And essentially as well, if you notice very carefully, there is the radio dial that essentially, if you look very carefully, it is the only thing in color, although there was one shot in the trailer where I think it might kind of turn to color, and that might be in the Rave Club, which I think would be extremely appropriate given what this film is about and the point I'm about to make. But yeah, the radio dial on the radios, which you see in 2 little shots, is the only thing in color, and it's a bright red color. And I honestly think that that's a very nice, although maybe on the nose, a metaphor for the radio or music being kind of like a beacon of light for these characters. Like it's the only beacon of hope for these characters. Music, this rave club, this kind of revolutionary moment, this is the only thing we have. And definitely with the black and white aesthetic of it just being so dark and kind of miserable and being in a bad situation, you don't think of the best times of your life as being colorful. You think of them as being very dark and very black and white. So that's something I really liked, and it's just such a simple thing, but it works. And I'm really appreciative of very small details like that. This is a comedy, and I'm feeling the comedy. They had a few jokes, like definitely I feel the chemistry between the two friends. You know, it does feel very emotional. It seems like it's going to get very emotional. And, you know, they definitely are like two odd peas in a pod for the most part. The film has a very grand kind of importance and scale to it, which is interesting. I mean, you kind of feel like you're with these characters. Even within this trailer, you feel like, you know, you're going to be part of something crazy, like you're really going to experience whatever this kind of build up to this moment is. And the trailer does kind of build you up and kind of get you hyped for this meeting, you know, this rave club, you know. And I think what they do with that is definitely going to be, I think, very interesting. Hopefully the film turns out pretty good. According to reviews, the film is pretty good. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. This is definitely one to watch for a lot of people who like their films, basically. And last trailer we're going to talk about is a trailer for a TV show, which I'm pretty happy for, and it is Lunatics. It is coming from the man behind the underrated Summer Heights High and Angry Boys, and that's Chris Lilly. And he's back with another character-based documentary, somewhat fly-on-the-wall series. Now, I will say, if you have or haven't watched the trailer, much like Sacha Baron Cohen's work, you're either going to get it or not get it. And Chris's work has kind of been the subject of people literally just going, it's not funny, or it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Already, I've just seen that critics are basically trashing the film, saying it's like unfunny and the worst thing ever. And, you know, that's fine. Critics really don't like his work for the most part, and that's completely understandable. I've noticed that a lot more English and Australian, because he is an Australian comedian, really kind of get and love his work. I do as well. I acknowledge that his work is very over the top. It's very silly. I think a lot of people are going to be put off by a lot of the very explicit references to sex and slightly more morbid things. He does not shy away from dark matters at all, especially with his characters. He's made references to certain things, and a lot of his characters can be very racist, very sexist, very nasty, nihilistic characters. And it seems like maybe almost all of these characters, you know, because he's dealing with a much bigger array of characters in this. For example, Summer Heights High was literally 3 characters, I think. Angry Boys, I think, was about 4. I think he's playing almost 8 in this series. And some of the characters, I don't know how much time we're going to spend with these characters. I don't know if dealing with this many characters is going to work out. I'm really looking forward to it. The fact that critics hate it means it's going to be good, because if The Guardian hates it, then that means it's pretty good. That's kind of like my metric for the most part. But I'm looking forward to it. I did think some of the jokes and some of the concepts were pretty great. The whole idea of a very pretentious artist going, hey, I'm going to make an exhibition about my genitals, you know, that's technically happened already, but obviously more and more people will gravitate and talk about something like this. And I think there are, you know, there's very realistic moments, like the character who you know, is in her house and you see it's all like decorated, all this stuff, and she's like very much an attention seeker. I think I'm special. That's a believable character. That's someone I've seen. You know, it does get silly when you get to, you know, some other characters, like the, you know, the lady who's an identical twin, but she's like 7'1", and you know, you've got the twins who all have like big arses, which is, you know, that stuff is very silly. But, you know, the stuff with, like I said, the woman who's very much an attention seeker, and the kid who, you know, 12-year-old kid who's, you know, on Instagram doing videos and kind of just not doing anything with his life on a farm. That's great. That's the kind of stuff. He really does excel more or less with kind of putting these crazy and, you know, ludicrous characters in very believable settings, to the point where they are very believable. You've probably met someone like this or know of someone like this, which is why the series, in my opinion, works so well for the most part. Or, well, his previous series, for example. If you're a bit worried to go into this series, I would recommend watching Summer Heights High. If you don't like Summer Heights High, skip Lunatics, because I can't guarantee you'll like it, because it basically looks like his normal work. But you know, I guess a thumbs up to Netflix for you know, actually getting this series. Maybe they funded it, I doubt it, but I'm looking forward to it whenever it drops. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up the podcast for the moment. I'm going to leave you with the video of the episode, which is going to be The Chemical Brothers, We've Got to Try. Now, I didn't even know that famous dance / big beat duo Chemical Brothers were back until literally about 3 days ago. And they dropped a music video, and keeping with their fantastic and very weird music videos, we have another very interesting, somewhat epic, very epic music video from them. I won't spoil what it is, but all I will really say is this is a very, very strong and very silly music video. I've probably one of my favorite music videos so far this year. Once you have watched this video, please watch the making of. It's only 2 minutes, but it's great to see how exactly they made that music video. Really, really great stuff. The song as well. I'm still kind of a bit torn on the song for the most part. It's got a weird blend of two kinds of sounds or elements or genres in music, which is kind of working, but I'm kind of like, don't really get it. I kind of like the second half of the song a little bit more, but yeah, I guess I'm going to leave it at that for the most part. There isn't really anything else to add to the podcast for the most part, but yeah, I'm trying to think. There really isn't. I kind of just want to apologize for a few of my breaks in talking and that little cut in between. I kind of mentally shut down, I'm afraid, and I kind of had to take a second to kind of reboot. It is early in the morning, and sorry for any excess noise that has appeared. You'd think it'd be quiet in the morning, but apparently not. But yeah, I guess I'll end this podcast like I always do by saying I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.